Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started today. I know a couple of us are going to have a hard cutoff at the end of this panel in order to get to another panel that we need to be at. So want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions and answer. Welcome everyone to Thin Green Line 2.0, Community Impacts and Resistance to West Coast Biomass Exports. Some familiar faces. I know some of you know more than a little about biomass in the audience today, but there's an amazing group of folks who are going to speak and really get into the details about this new emerging industry, the impacts that it's having, and the ways that the lessons we can learn from the first Thin Green Line fights and how that can inform community resistance to this new round. I'm Alex Budd. I'm with the Pacific Northwest Forest Climate Alliance. I'm moderating today. We don't have a table where we all get to sit at, so moderating, we're going to be shuffling up and down from the microphone. How many folks have heard of the Thin Green Line before? Okay, most people. The Thin Green Line is a term that refers to this ongoing series of grassroots fights against fossil fuel export terminals over the last 20 years or so on the West Coast. There was a big push by the fossil fuel industry with tar sands oil, the Bakken oil fields, Powder River Basin coal, and other fossil fuel deposits that were being extracted about 10, 15 years ago to build a bunch of export capacity so they could sell that internationally, mostly to East Asia. Largely, almost entirely within the United States, I think we're going to hear more about what the situation was like in BC. Those proposals were all shut down and stopped. Like literally dozens of coal export terminals, liquefied natural gas plants and pipelines, and oil shipping terminals that were stopped. Now we're seeing sorry, Gary, I'm getting ahead of myself. Now we're seeing the emergence of a new industry, or kind of a new round of that, with the biomass industry setting up shop here in the Northwest. And that's what we're going to talk about. That's my intro. Gary, I'm going to pass it off to Gary with Biofuel Watch.
All right, thank you so much, Alex. Thanks everyone for being here and for your patience as we got started this morning. My name is Gary Hughes, and I work with an organization called Biofuel Watch. We're an international organization, small team of staff and volunteers, mostly based in the UK, and then myself based in California. And I am going to see if I can move these slides forward. The idea here is that with all the panelists is I'm just going to quickly share kind of a biomass 101. We know a lot of people here know a lot about biomass, but we want to make sure everyone here has a really good vocabulary. So the idea of burning biomass to generate electricity can be really connected with the timber industry as they developed, kind of resource efficiencies, as it were, and found that they could turn turbines with steam from burning biomass. This is a famous biomass plant in Scotia, California, originally from Pacific Lumber Company, now Humboldt Redwood Company. Generates maybe around, 25 megawatts and such. But this is just burning, as you can see, chips, in a lot of instances mill residue, but just other forest debris and just kind of raw forest material generating electricity. This is kind of like biomass energy. But what we're really confronting on a global scale can be captured by what happened in Stockton. Okay, Stockton, we'll come back to see what's going on in Stockton, but it's a city at the eastern end of the Delta. San Joaquin River comes in right there, and there was a coal-powered plant there that for 20 years burned coal, and then it was shuttered in 2009. This was a really dirty, small coal-powered electricity-generating plant, and then this company, DTE from Michigan, bought it in 2010 and 2014 because in California there was a surge of support for biomass electricity as a renewable energy. This plant came back online, and they're mostly burning like orchard, vineyard, ag waste, some forest material, but they're cranking along, and it is a really super dirty ongoing situation right there in Stockton, but it really is a case study in this global trend of converting coal-powered power plants to burning biomass. Now, really quickly, though, here's another Mendocino Redwood Company, Humboldt Redwood Company, little plant. This is a 30,000 ton a year wood pellet plant. So we now in California start to see these wood pellet plants emerge, and in this instance, These wood pellet plants are being, the wood pellets are being packaged up in 40-pound bags for home heating, which is a problem on its own. In Germany, it is the major biomass problem. For us, we're like going to come down the scale a little bit because the real scary thing that's happening with the wood pellet industry is this idea of converting coal-powered power plants to burning biomass. And not even necessarily just converting them. In some instances, just co-firing. You know, it's just burning whatever they can. Make sure everyone knows what a wood pellet is. This is a densified wood pellet. They have to be manufactured to specific standards. This is one of the reasons why we want everyone to just believe the narrative that they're just taking, you know, pine needles and little branches and scraping some of the you know, stuff up off the forest floor and making wood pellets. Is to make this densified wood pellet specifications, you need round wood. You need real trees to do so. This is from a photo from coverage. Thinking here it is in Reuters to give credit, but this is from the Drax power plant. So something we want everyone to come out of this, even though a lot of people already know a lot about biomass, a lot of people here know about Drax. We want to make everyone knows about the UK climate villain Drax. So they took their coal-powered power plant in Yorkshire and started converting it to burning biomass. We'll come into more about the ramifications of this, but this has been one of the biggest campaigns in the UK for many, many years to get Drax to not only stop burning biomass, but to shut the whole thing down. We focused on Barclays, but this Drax power plant is the biggest carbon emitter in the UK. It's the biggest biomass burner in the world. And the other thing about Drax is because of their move into the wood pellet sector is they have a wood pellet production and distribution sector of their company that just stands on its own. And that's what we're confronting on the West Coast now. So this is an example, we'll come back to this. This is what's at threat. This is the heart of the Pitt River Valley, a little place called New Beaver. And this is the site where the construction and operation of a 700,000 ton a year wood pellet manufacturing plant is proposed under the guise of the Golden State Natural Resources Project, and GSNR signed an MOU a year ago with Drax. So I'm going to turn this over now to Rita. Should I just go on to the next slide?
That'd be great. Thanks, Gary. Hi, everybody. My name is Rita Von Frost. I'm a forest advocate with the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'm originally from the southeastern United States. I'm bringing that forward to y'all today because I have been around the wood pellet manufacturing industry for about 10 years now. The wood pellet manufacturing industry has been at scale in the southern United States since about 2010, 2011, when the Renewable Energy Directive in the European Union and the United Kingdom deemed burning biomass, these wood pellets, as Gary showed us, as being carbon neutral. This is erroneous. It's scientifically indefensible. Scientists have thoroughly dispelled this notion. However, it's really great on paper, and politicians have admitted to us in backdoor conversations that, hey, we are so far along in meeting our Paris Climate Agreement targets with biomass that it's hard for us to disentangle ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not. In fact, we're seeing some of those subsidies decisions getting overturned. There have been major decisions in the United Kingdom, in the Netherlands, in Denmark, but this definition on paper of being renewable has been very beneficial for previous coal-fired power plants for the industry, and we're seeing those policies getting replicated in South Korea and Japan. So enter in these wood pellet manufacturing massive projects on the West Coast, because we have new energy demand coming from South Korea and Japan, and they need a new fiber basket, is the way the industry has put it. So with that introduction and with Gary laying the groundwork here, I want to really bring warning about what the wood pellet manufacturing industry entails for the Pacific Northwest and ask the crucial question, is the Pacific Northwest ready for the biomass boom? There are 4 industrial scale wood pellet manufacturing plants that are currently proposed. 2 are up in Washington. Thank you, Tegan. There are 2 up in Washington, and then there are 2 in California, as Gary started talking about with the Lassen County facility. There's also 1 in Tuolumne County. I'm going to focus on Washington because I want to whet your palate and invite you to come to a panel I'm on later today at 2:15. That's where we're going to be focusing on California wood pellet manufacturing facilities, but let's focus on the ones in Washington itself. So we have 1 proposal in Longview. That's right across the river from Portland. This picture on the left is the sourcing radius for that facility. It's about a 50-mile radius. The other facility is in Hoquiam, and I wish I could reach, but it's the bay up all the way in the northwestern part of the state. So that's in Hoquiam. This is an image created by Twin Harbors Waterkeeper. NRDC is not leading either of these campaigns, neither the one in Longview nor the one in Hoquiam, but we are part of a broader coalition that is made up primarily of grassroots groups, because groups have learned about the issue, and they're really ready to get involved, probably because of the thin green line fights. So how is it starting? Okay, so we're already in the thick of it. I want to tell y'all that we have an opportunity to stop these plants. There is still a lot of time to be able to put a stop to them. However, where we're at right now is that the Hoquiam facility has received its air permit, and the Longview facility is pretty far along. As you can see, this is a wood pellet dome. This is a telltale sign of the wood pellet manufacturing industry. You can see these along almost every export terminal in the southeastern United States. That's the Drax facility. Drax thought that they had their permits. I'll come back to that in a second. But as you can see, they have their export terminal. They're starting to put in plans of what's happening next. In their mind, they thought that they could blow up their storage terminal. They couldn't, but I'll come back to that. We also have some incentives that the states are giving to these facilities. So for the Pacific Northwest Renewable Energy Facility, they've received 2 big subsidies so far. They've received a $200,000 grant from the State Department of Commerce through a program that's meant to accelerate manufacturing job growth. And then the U.S. Forest Service has also approved a $300,000 grant, part of their Wood Innovations Grant Program. Now, how is it actually going? Well, it's not going all that well. So first off, Drax was not supposed to inflate that facility that I showed y'all a couple slides ago. Local watchdogs came out on their porch to have their morning coffee and saw that Drax dome. Now, they're involved enough to know that they don't have actually any permits to be able to construct yet. So they snapped a picture, sent it to the Southwest Clean Air Act Authority, and they said, hey, I think that they're constructing already and they have no permits, right? They were able to get them on site. They slapped them with a $34,000 fine. This is not the first fine that this facility has received. In fact, last year in 2023, they had some illegal discharges into the Columbia River. So they're not really showing themselves to be a great member of the community thus far. And then how's it going up in Hoquiam? Well, Earth Justice, NRDC, and local partners have decided to challenge the permit that the Hoquiam facility received. We think that looking at their HAPS modeling and their volatile organic compounds monitoring, that they have some illegal numbers in there, and so we're challenging it and we're bringing it in front of a Pollution Control Board hearing in later this year, actually in April to May is when we expect that to happen. So the reason why I bring this up is because this, based off of my history and working in this industry, the time to stop wood pellet manufacturing facilities is before they get built. However, the southeastern United States was at a severe disadvantage. The wood products manufacturing industry has a very long history in the southeastern United States as well as the Pacific Northwest. The way that this industry was kind of sold to everybody was we're going to be using wastes, leftovers, residues. This is already part of your normal wood products manufacturing industry. We're just going to be taking stuff that nobody wants anyways, so we're not going to have an impact. Southerners, for the most part, believed that. I don't think that it's too far to say that even forest watchdogs, a lot of them did not get involved in the initial stages of wood pellet manufacturing fights in the southeastern United States. because of how the industry was posing themselves. However, what we have seen on the ground is very different, and that has helped prepare groups in the Pacific Northwest to be challenging these facilities. And this is why we're already at the stage where, hey, somebody could go out and see that view of the Longview port and know something was wrong and alert their Clean Air Authority. And then secondly, that Earth Justice and NRDC were willing to step up with local partners and challenge a permit that had been given. So this is what I'm talking a little bit about, like how the industry has sold itself. So there are a lot of dangers from the industry based off of public health harms, which I'll talk about a little bit, but also there's the significant threat that the wood pellet manufacturing industry will just increase forest degradation. In the southeastern United States, studies have actually shown that deforestation, true deforestation, has actually happened in relation to the wood pellet manufacturing industry. When this industry sets up, they make logging worse, and they increase the reaches of logging. These are some of the pictures that I've taken myself when I was working at an organization called Dogwood Alliance, when I would go out and track and trace the industry and do some watchdogging on the ground to actually be showing where they're sourcing from and what sorts of trees and materials they're taking from. In the southeastern United States, you know, wetlands and bottomland hardwood forests are some of the most precious second growth forests that we have. We saw the wood pellet industry taking from those forests time and time again. I know that Tegan will be able to share later today also about what their impacts are like up in Canada, which again is not anything to be proud of. There are also some significant environmental justice issues with wood pellet manufacturing facilities. I don't know if this has something to do with the fact that Drax is from the United Kingdom and they're a multinational energy corporation, but they have not proven themselves to be a good neighbor to communities. They're 50% more likely to be located in environmental justice communities. They've had 11,000 plus environmental violations, mostly against the Clean Air Act, but also in terms of their water discharges. And this has led us to having partners really lead these campaigns that are local groups, that are community groups that just live around the facilities and are tired of the impacts. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, has multiple resolutions against the wood pellet manufacturing industry because of this community opposition and pushback. Again, this just details the 11,000 plus times. In talking to lawyers at NRDC who work on a lot of different issues, they have told me that this amount of violations, 11,000 plus violations against American environmental regulations, is on par with the oil and gas industry. I think that just shows us that this is a different player. It's not part of the traditional wood products manufacturing industry. They're really setting themselves apart in the way that they're acting with impunity, the health impacts that they have, the community impacts they have, and the forest impacts they have. And with that, I'll pass it over to Gloria, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those local impacts with the California facilities in Stockton.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gloria Alonso Cruz. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work as the Environmental Justice Advocacy Coordinator with a community-based organization called Little Manila Rising, based out of South Stockton. South Stockton is, since I drove last night here, 8 hours away from here, just so you get a sense for where it's at. And today I'll be trying to, tell you the story about a couple of elements that have allowed us to understand what environmental justice is and how we see this wood pellet storage and export facility impacting our community even more by understanding the cumulative impacts of all of these elements, right? And so here, just before I move on, this is for those that are familiar with this is an old redlining map of the city of Stockton. This is a kind of like a montage or an edited image combining what used to be the historic Little Manila community, which is actually in that hatch area at the middle of the map and was destroyed by the development of a crosstown freeway. And obviously the crosstown freeway there. And then on this side we have the Port of Stockton. And you can see, I don't know if you see the smokestack over there. but that's DTE, what Gary was mentioning earlier. And that's a picture of the ocean-going vessels. Since we do have a deep water channel, we are blessed by being in the heart of the central, the northern border of the Central Valley. And by saying that, I want you to understand that we're at a crossroads, sort of. We see ourselves as a Central Valley community. We have multiple sectors that benefit from Central Valley labor and the agricultural richness of the Central Valley. And we also have the Delta, which provides us with access to a deep water channel that, at the end of the day, helps us have the ocean-going vessels reach our community. And more industry find appeal in South Stockton because of that. And so in order to capture all of the cumulative impacts and how we see this industry impacting ourselves, I have to take you back a couple of years. Even though I have been working with Little Manila Rising for about 2 years now, my work really started when I was 19 years old. I am 25 years old today. And it started because we got funding from the California Air Resources Board and the San Joaquin Air Pollution Control District, which are two air permitting agencies, to sort of put it, or jurisdictions that oversee what goes on with air pollution and so on and so forth in the Valley or in California. And so in 2019, we got a massive amount of funding in the millions to figure out how we understand air pollution, how we mitigate it using participatory planning, quote unquote, or equitable models of participation to figure out what the community thinks is best to mitigate emissions. And so what you see right here, over there, it's the boundary, and it represents the broader South Stockton area. The white line, it's obviously the deep water channel, which represents part of the port, and those gray lines that you see dissecting the community in half are the freeway that I was alluding to earlier in the slide. That area that says the homestead and that other area on the left represent and this other area on the far right represent the broader South Stockton as from a community perspective. And then right here at the bottom, you see the TCC boundary. TCC stands for Transformative Climate Communities, and it's another massive pot of funding that the state provided us to tackle the impacts that we see from air emissions at a local level. And so multiple things have been thrown at Stockton to figure out what we need to do about air pollution. But the question remains, and the fact that we are one of the most polluted communities in the Valley remains, right? And so here I have a snippet of the Sacramento Bee article when the project, the AB 617 funding started to pick up, and we started to critically understand what environmental justice means, how we can actually tap into these structures and understand what happens behind the scenes that drives the impacts of air pollution. And by saying so, I'm trying to give you in a nutshell what the article is trying to capture. And so the title reads, Communities of Color in Stockton Want Cleaner Air Where They Live. Is California listening? And this is our executive director expressing how the AB 617 funding at the end of the day earmark $5 million so that the port can figure out how to, in a way, continue to receive dirty, polluting, ocean-going vessels and trucks. And so the community, because this was before environmental justice became a buzzword at a local level, we have multiple challenges trying to navigate that. And so those challenges remain, right? But one thing is true. In 2019, the same year when we got that funding, the Allergy and Asthma Foundation of America ranked Stockton as the 45th city for asthma rates. So this is nationwide, right? Like this is nationwide. Every single community across the nation is included in this, and we ranked 45th. Sorry. This is a picture of some of our staffers. Under Little Manila, we have multiple programs that, as a result of that funding that I was describing, have received multiple sources of support to understand how to provide services that intervene, that that sort of mitigate the conditions of asthma and keep them under control for local community members. And so we pride ourselves on educating the community, and so this is one of the director of that program providing information to one of the elementaries that are less than 5 miles away from the Port of Stockton and less than 5 miles away from where the Golden State Natural Resources Wood Pellet Project will be built. This is also an article from ABC 10 expanding on what the impacts of asthma look like, and then they elaborate a little bit more on some other EPA regulations that we would be benefiting on. But the main message here is the fact that asthma has a cause that is very real, right? Like, it's not only our health, but it's also additional financial burdens on community members that already face some of the highest percentile for poverty, for low educational attainment, for existing cardiovascular conditions, environmental conditions such as high diesel exposure, and the list goes on, right? At the end of the slides, I will show you a list of a geospatial mapping tool called CalEnviroScreen that sort of compiles that in a visual manner, or summarizes that story in a visual manner. And so, just so you understand, this is something that we're well aware of, right? We have a history of discrimination. We have put boots on the ground to try to address this. The state has recognized this and named us a disadvantaged community and even provided us with massive pots of funding, but yet the issue remains. And so, just to elaborate on some of the other programs we got, because it's not only air pollution, it's also as being part of the San Joaquin Valley Basin, we also see ourselves impacted by the impacts of aerosol optical depth, which contribute to our severe case of urban heat island, which is just a horrible heat waves throughout the summer that just continue to, whose effects and the effects of this urban heat island effect just continue to get worse because of the landscape, the makeup of the landscape. We have a lot of pavement, in other words, right, and not enough trees. And so right here, this is a snippet of a study that NASA developed, conducted just last year to summarize what we're seeing on the ground. And so they, by conducting this study, they understand that Stockton actually has the worst convergence for heat, air pollution, low canopy coverage, and sociodemographic vulnerabilities compared to the northern areas of our local city, right? It's not even at a regional level, it's also at a very hyper-local level. And so those historical impacts of discrimination still live on and continue to be manifested in the landscape. And again, we pride ourselves in educating the community, so those are some of our my coworkers providing information to our community on tree plantings within those boundaries that I showed to you earlier. And so even though we have received all of this amazing legislative efforts that have paid closer attention to Stockton, in 2004, just last year, we took 3 steps backward. We were ranked 35th, the 35th city asthma capital across the nation. So just let that sink in. And then just to provide more context, sorry, my throat is super dry. The city, this also means, in more detail, that we ranked some of the highest asthma-related ED emergency department visits. So you see us here listed as number 7. So again, this just adds to the story that I was sharing with you. The impacts of air pollution are way deeper than what we see manifested in people's health, right? They also impact people's pockets, and they, in a way, displace them too, right? Going back to that article, thank you, I appreciate it. I'll do. I'm recovering from whatever is going around, making people fall like flies in California. Just to elaborate on the article that I was showing you, at the moment we're trying to understand how incoming industry, whether that is good industry or false climate solutions, contribute to this story that we're seeing. That we're seeing in a bit of a perpetual state, right? Like we have chronic exposure to pollution, we're having legislative interventions, we're having funding to try to mitigate this with underground services, but yet there is a massive difference from 2019 to 2024, right? How can we be going 3 steps back? And so, as I think I'm good on time, right? Yeah. So going back to the land uses and the story that we have been trying to wrestle with, or this challenge that we have been trying to wrestle with the Port of Stockton, is understanding the proximity the broader South Stockton has to the Port of Stockton as a driver for industrial activity and much more. And so here, this is data from 2018, from the 2018 draft Clean Air Plan that shows that ships or ocean-going vessels actually contribute, are the largest emitting sector for nitrogen oxides emission, representing 60% of those emissions in 2018. NOx, if you do not know, because you do not have asthma, contributes to the high levels, to exacerbating asthma conditions, and increases the risk of cancer and forms smog. And so just so you know what's happening behind the scenes for community members who have those pre-existing health conditions. And it's the same thing with particulate matter 2.5, with the pie here showing that in 2018, we had a 62% of those emissions coming from ocean-going vessels. And to provide you with more accurate numbers, just to reiterate, as an inland port, Stockton is a major driver for regional freight activity, and ocean-going vessels, or OGVs, are the largest source of those emissions, contributing to, in 2022, 73% of NOx emissions, 72% of PM 2.5, and 58% of greenhouse gas emissions. And so here is that map that I was talking about. Calaveras created a geospatial mapping tool that allows us to understand with granular data and taking the census tract approach what the percentiles are for all of those socio-environmental characteristics or socio-demographic characteristics that I listed before. And so red here represents some of those highest scores, with the broader South Stockton being the most red. And so I have here this overlay map with Calaveras screen, and then I overlaid the red line neighborhoods. And so you can see this positive relationship between where are those red line neighborhoods and where Calaveras screen is showing that we have the highest percentiles. And this map, I actually used it for something else that was going on in the community at the time, which was a year ago, when the city of Stockton decided to annex, to move forward with an industrial annexation. And so what does that mean? If you understand zoning, it just means acquiring land and purposing it for having the intent to conduct industrial activity there. And so that's right here, right adjacent to the port, to South Stockton, and in really close proximity to the Port of Stockton, for a reason, right? It's very strategic, but it's also, it contributes to this evolving and I guess like toxic cycle that the city has us under, right? Like in a way, it kind of feels like they're trying to either, you know, take advantage of pollution as a silent killer, or just displace the community. But that's just my personal take. But all this to say that these cumulative impacts are something that we cannot afford, right? Like, these climate solutions are not something that we can afford at a local level. And unfortunately, that's what it feels like with Golden State Natural Resources listing the Port of Richmond and the Port of Stockton in 2022 or 2023 at the beginning? 22? Thank you. And Richmond instantly kicking them out of their port. Meanwhile, Stockton still remains as the only option. Damn it, Port of Stockton. But our spirit remains, and we continue to pride ourselves in educating the community. Damn. And so we're here with that amazing coalition trying to sound the alarm.
Hi, I'm Nick Joslin. I work at the Mount Shasta Bioregional Ecology Center. We're going to go a little upstream in the process now and talk about the forested regions that GSNR wants to source this material from. So I'm a geologist. I went to school at University of Oregon and graduated in the late 90s. And I also am a fifth-generation resident of Siskiyou County, which is northern county in California, and neighbors the county of Lassen, which is where one of the facilities is to be sited. So this is sort of a Google Earth view of the region right now. New Beaver is where they want to place this facility. This is the current state of the forest in this region. And the narrative, I think, people hear about California is that there's a lot of regulation and they can't really log, and this kind of shows that's false. And I wanted to show how we actually got to where we are. So this is a little time lapse that's going to start in the 80s. This is a spooky little zone right here. And so, the current state of our forest is not great in California. And largely private timberland converting their forests to plantations. Federal logging isn't really a huge issue currently. And, but it's, with a project like this, it would be slated to increase federal land logging at an amazing pace. And I wanted to also talk about, aside from the forest impacts, the impacts this would have on communities when you concentrate these fuels in these communities. So I lived in Weed, which has a biomass plant, like these regional biomass plants like Gary had talked about. Kind of small facilities that generate power, sometimes just using the wood waste that the mill produces itself. And but they're also extremely dangerous to these communities. And in 2014, an arson fire spread to the nearby Roseburg facility. And this is after it burned through about a third of the town. And it ignited the chip piles that Roseburg just piles up next to this biomass plant. And so this little video that shows that's the biomass facility right there. Mount Shasta obscured by the smoke, the town's still burning. The chip piles, after they put out the town fires, burned for days. And all they could do is push the piles flat with a bulldozer and hope that it went out eventually on its own. So there's a great hazard to these things being sited and in communities. This one started for sale. So in 2022, same facility, Roseburg, actually was the source of ignition for the mill fire. And that fire quickly spread from the building they were storing their ash when they dump out the biomass waste. There's ash with hot coals, and it's supposed to be a fireproof building with sprinkler system. This is moments after the fire started, immediately ignited this giant wooden building, and then immediately spread into the community. They could barely get people evacuated. It killed 2 people. Roseburg was found negligent by CAL FIRE during the investigation. And so my point really is that we're being told in California that our forests are overstocked. There's a fuel density that's not safe. And this plan, their solution is to bring that fuel right into these communities and stockpile it in these giant sites. The site in New Beaver is 25 acres, but it would have football fields full of logs. And Tegan will show some slides about what these actually look like on the ground. The amount of wood that's there and the fire hazard that is presented by either ignitions coming to the site or fires starting on the site and spreading into the facilities it's a risk that I don't think our communities deserve to bear. And so I wanted to end this little tidbit with a picture similar to Gary. This is where the site is. And because I'm a geologist and have studied a lot of water stuff, this is the basin that it's sort of the headwaters of Fall River and Pitt River, and it's a giant wetland. It's all kind of converted to ag right now. The water table is basically at the ground level. So this plan would call for bringing in 8 to 10 feet of fill to lift the plants basically out of the water and essentially deal with their runoff with some sort of state-issued permit. And so these permits that would ostensibly be needed following potential approval of the environmental impact report are permits we're going to have to sort of watchdog the state on and try to convince the state that the risks are just too high to let these facilities continue to sort of view the West Coast as the next place to build out this capacity. And this area is ancestral lands of the Pitt River Nation. The headwaters of these rivers come out of Medicine Lake volcano, which is one of the newest national monuments in California, Satitla Highlands National Monument, that Biden just signed. They want to consider this whole area a new fiber basket, like Rita had described, and be a main source area for these logs, not wood waste, straight logging, not and as you can see in those other slides, like they have been logging heavily. They want to increase the amount of logging over what they currently do. So I'm going to hand it off now to Tegan.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah. A lot of what folks have talked about today is very familiar. So my name's Tegan Hansen. I am a senior forest campaigner at Stand.Earth, which is a cross-border international organization. Solidarity with Gloria, I also drove 8 hours, but from the opposite direction. I came down from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories, also known as Vancouver, British Columbia. And I live and work around the province of BC. And so, similarly to what Rita was saying, the sector in British Columbia has been around for a while, but it's grown really rapidly in recent years. And I wanted to share some of what we've learned in trying to fight this sector that I think will be really relevant to the struggles here. And then also how I was introduced to STAND as an organization was when I was an activist fighting the Trans Mountain pipeline, which sadly was one of the projects on that map that did go forward, and that tar sands pipeline was operationalized last year to the Salish Sea. But many other projects have been stopped, and there's a lot of hope to stop projects that are being proposed. So British Columbia, the images from Nick are very familiar. If you take a Google Earth look, especially around central BC, you're going to see that patchwork of clear cuts all over the province. And really what we're seeing now is a traditional forestry sector that's in decline, and actually our biggest logging companies are moving to the US Southeast after decades and decades of overlogging and logging the biggest, oldest forests and creating catastrophes around BC. Now what we're seeing is a growth in the wood pellet sector, which has really sold itself as a solution for things like waste and slash pile burning and making better use of fiber. This is a cut block. This is what most cut blocks in BC look like. They look a lot worse because there's about 40 of these slash piles, and it's a massive area and it's devastating. This block was actually logged by a pellet company. The practice of logging doesn't change depending on what you're logging for. It's usually done by contractors, so they go in and they clear, and there's a lot of wood that they don't want to haul out, and they push it into these piles, and then they're burned. And so that creates a health impact for people who live in these communities, in these valleys, where the smoke from slash pile burning, especially in the fall, can create lung issues as well. And that, the wood pellet sector in our government's really seized on that problem. But I can tell you, as someone whose family lives near a pellet plant, it is pretty enraging to see the pellet plant operating, and then in the hills above in November, the slash piles burning as they normally do. What we actually see at pellet plants are sites like this. So this is a log yard of a plant on Wet'suwet'en territory, sort of central BC, and this is typical. And companies will source a mix of fiber from a timber company. So Drax is a UK coal plant that's been converted to biomass. Drax has a near monopoly on wood pellet plants in British Columbia. British Columbia exports most of Canada's wood pellets. We're third right now. We were just overtaken by Vietnam, and then the US exports the most wood pellets in the world. We used to export most of our wood pellets to the UK. In the past few years, that has shifted, and we're now mostly exporting to Japan. We're also seeing South Korea and other places in Europe. But Drax, as a company, they've been facing heavy criticism in the UK for bringing in pellets from, I will say really sadly, it seems like they've gotten more opposition to sourcing from primary and old forests than to the human health impacts in communities. They should both be a concern for the UK government. However, we're seeing subsidies restrictions coming in on Drax in the UK to do with sourcing from primary and old forests, because there's no way to source wood from BC and say that it's not coming from a primary or old forest. They just can't guarantee that. Most logging in BC is, especially in the interior where wood pellets are coming from, is primary or old growth forests. However, Drax, as we now know, is supplying Japan. And so again, as you see this company come in and knowing that these markets are increasing in the Pacific Northwest, this side of the border, these markets are your primary concern. These are from some photos at a different pellet plant. Again, it's hard to grasp the scale because it's really a lot bigger than this. This is also on Wet'suwet'en territory in Smithers. My coworker and I snuck in and sat by this log yard for a few hours and just watched kind of truck after truck after truck after truck get unloaded. And this facility is partnered with one of the top old growth loggers in the province of British Columbia. And it's in a region where people have been fighting huge resource extraction projects. So this is the same area where, or the same territory where the Wet'suwet'en First Nation and leaders fought the Northern Gateway Pipeline and defeated that. They've been fighting the Coastal GasLink fracked gas pipeline, which is still ongoing, and now, most recently, the Prince Rupert gas transmission line. And so we're seeing, in an area where there's a disproportionate amount of old growth logging, where there's these pipeline projects being pushed through, and we're seeing the concentration of the wood pellet export sector in British Columbia. So all of these things are really going together, and the impact on the land is really severe. And I really wanted to drive home a point that Nick made, and connecting to the subsidies piece, because one of the warnings I want to give you all is something that we've seen in BC around subsidies, is that they come under the guise of wildfire mitigation. So our provincial, unlike California, most of BC, it's all Indigenous land. It's all stolen Indigenous land, but it's mostly 93% Crown land. So it's public land that the province gives tenure and permits for. And they subsidize companies in different ways, but one of them is to give them money to mitigate the risk of wildfires. We've had absolutely catastrophic wildfires in recent years. Mostly as a result of really bad logging practices that have made landscapes more vulnerable, and then fueled also by climate change and record-breaking temperatures, and we're currently in a drought. But to bring this back, so what does this mean for the Thin Green Line 2.0? One of the challenges we've seen with this sector is the really successful labeling as a green, sustainable, carbon neutral sector. And so it doesn't get the same attention or opposition as coal projects, tar sands, oil. We've also seen our governments misuse the idea of cleaner fuels to push forward fracked gas pipelines. The false solutions front is really huge. And it makes it harder to fight, because also you have, a forestry sector that props itself up as green and the solution to climate issues. However, as we've just heard, people are suffering with the health impacts. It's not better for the global climate. An argument can be made that it's worse than fossil fuels in some cases. And it's certainly not a solution for communities locally or globally in the long term or in the short term. So when we look at some successes, and I have to say, as someone who fought against fossil fuel opposition, has fought for years north of the border, something that we've talked about and that I've talked about with my coworkers at Stand is the mechanisms that are available south of the border that aren't always. So in British Columbia, we don't have counties, and local and municipal governments have a different level of power. We have a lot of power concentration in our provincial governments and in our federal government. When I was driving here, I drove through Whatcom County, and so, as I was fighting Trans Mountain years ago, the Lummi Nation, local grassroots groups, environmental organizations, and more were fighting multiple fossil fuel projects in Whatcom County, including a massive new coal infrastructure, shipping pipelines. And actually, what all of these site fights turned into was locally led legislation, or that's probably not the word you would use on the side of the border, but regulation from Whatcom County to actually reduce the ability of fossil fuel companies to expand locally. And so out of all of these site fights came, from a refinery community, a regulatory barrier to what the fossil fuel industry wanted to achieve. And that has been really powerful, and also has been used as an example for local-led opposition to fossil fuel infrastructure in other counties. And so I think this is like a question for us to answer, and I'm going to hand it back to Alex, is how can we, use that as an example to now oppose these projects as they're coming to the Pacific Northwest. They're forestry, but are they so different from fossil fuels if they're having the same impacts on our communities and our global climate? And I think that there's an incredible amount of leadership in this room. And very selfishly, also, I will say that the opposition, successful opposition to these projects in the US will have profound impacts for our opposition in Canada, where these facilities are already operating and where we have a lot of work to do to try to scale them back. So very much here for that fight. Pass it back to Alex.
Thanks, y'all. We're going to move into question and answer. I guess one question I have for you, Tegan, maybe to kick that off. I'm curious, are there things that you have found in BC that have been effective? Obviously, it's a very different regulatory environment, like you looked like, but like, what has the organizing against the biomass industry there looked like? Are there things that have worked or not worked as well?
Should I come up or should I yell?
Yeah, you can just yell.
Okay, I'll project. I mean, there's been lots of good work, and I mean, even so, I know Gary and others of the Conservation North, Biofuel Watch, and Walker Valley, a local group in the Smithers area, put out a great report last year showing the link between old growth logging and wood pellet sourcing. And that's something that both our government in BC and DRAX have been vehemently trying to deny, because they knew that it would be something that would potentially cost them their subsidies, which they need to be profitable and to operate. And as I said before, it's, you know, I've talked to reporters in the UK and trying to explain to them how the logging industry in British Columbia, how it works, I think maybe even worse than here. It is astounding. And it's almost impossible to trace. I've talked to government officials in BC who don't know what's happening because they're waiting for the companies to tell them. That's how bad our monitoring is. And so we, you know, you have a company and you know, our Minister of Forests, our Chief Forester, who's a bureaucrat who controls the level of cat. I will say our last Chief Forester now works at DRAX. There was no gap. She went directly from working as the person who assigns the harvest in BC to working as the VP of Sustainability at DRAX. This is not unusual in British Columbia. So, and they are, our Premier, our Minister have denied publicly that, you know, anything other than waste or that old growth would be used for pellets. And DRAX has denied that. We did a freedom of information request last year, and we have, you know, proof that DRAX knew and emails about this sourcing. It's not surprising, but showing that, exposing that publicly has been really helpful, and we want to do more of that. So really just showing the worst of the worst and casting doubt, using that to cast doubt on their claims that DRAX makes, because we know that they're not who they say they are. But it's hard to drive that home when you have your governments and a very well-oiled PR machine underpinned by the United Nations frameworks on what is carbon control. You know, you have our work cut out.
Folks have other questions? Yeah?
This is related. I'm just wondering, just more broadly, I guess in the US in particular, how we can get involved. What would be the simplest, most direct action items?
I think there are various layers to that. There's folks working at like the policy realm. I know Gary and Biofuels Watch are doing that. Here in the Northwest, the Northwest Forest Climate Alliance is working to build a coalition along the West Coast. So we meet regularly with folks fighting the proposals in California and also in Washington. Do you want to add to that, Brenna?
Yeah, I could just add, if you're curious about the Washington fight, there's a local coalition in Washington. I'm not sure where people are located, who's both fighting the Hoquiam and the Longview plants. You can talk to me about getting involved in that.
Yeah, I find it, about getting involved, really exciting, all the organizing that's been happening in Oregon and Washington around, stopping these plants. I think in some ways there may be a better way to plug in to that organizing. I don't want to underestimate what we're doing in California, and we've had some really good success with lots of support from all around the nation and indeed around the world. But one of the things that we've found that's challenging is like it's a little bit ephemeral. The environmental review process under the California Environmental Quality Act has been something that we've been able to leverage. They went through a draft period, Golden State Natural Resources, but now they just got the ball in their court, and they just kind of got it. So it's kind of a challenging moment for us in that we're looking for those hooks, and we're trying to keep this issue in the public eye, which is challenging, I think, for everyone on all sorts of different grounds. But one of the easy ways that we found to tell people to get involved is to check out resources that are available online, for instance, from the Natural Resources Defense Council or the Center for Biological Diversity, which has had a really key role in our efforts. In California, they're not here today.
Can I add one more thing? There
Yes.
is a national biomass webinar on April 7th. It's World Public Health Day, and it's going to be really focused on the public health impacts of biomass. Dogwood Alliance from the Southeast, who Rita mentioned, is phenomenally organizing that, like organizing a national coalition. So check out their website, and there's links to it. It'll be 5 p.m. Western time, 8 Eastern time on April 7th.
We should have put a slide together for that.
Yeah. The last thing I'll just add on that is that we have an enormous education gap here in the Pacific Northwest about the threats of these wood pellet manufacturing facilities because it's so effectively greenwashed and because there already are existing bioenergy facilities and wood chip facilities. And so oftentimes those get conflated and mixed up, and people all of a sudden are like, you're going after my wood pellet stove, what are you talking about? But this is not that. This is industrial scale energy production. Just to put it in perspective, a full 60% of what the European Union counts as renewable energy is biomass. They're burning biomass. It's a huge amount of biomass, and that could very well set itself up here in the Pacific Northwest. And so I don't want to underestimate the power of like educating people about this issue, especially because forestry gets so greenwashed, and the wood pellet manufacturing industry has glommed onto that. Like they've really tried to latch themselves onto those coattails and just ride the greenwashing wave. So I'm a huge fan of just basic education.
Sorry, did y'all want to add anything more to that? Nick or Clay?
I think at a local level, just piggybacking off of what Rita said, basic education, making it as accessible as possible has proven itself really useful for local organizing efforts, especially to mitigate the absence of climate literacy in communities with, as I said, low attainment, low educational attainment. It's really hard to demystify the impacts of air pollution. And so trying to organize those type of events and make them fun and accessible and relatable have been key. Like making sure that we share and uplift the stories from the southeastern states was a very important we organized a panel just to share their testimonies, and we cross-pollinated each other. Right? Like we understand environmental justice is a nationwide issue, and we understand the socio-demographic characteristics are not unique to Stockton, and so making sure that we connect with other communities and uplift their voices in that manner has been very nice and successful.
Yeah.
Well, we're in Eastern Oregon, and there are already small plants that are there, and they are in those very starving communities like John Bay and so forth. So what we're trying to work on is exactly what you're saying, is educating Eastern Oregon of like, okay, this is small scale, but this is what you need to know about them.
Yep.
And because in Prineville in particular, there's no way those people are gonna like not have that plan there, because they think they're gonna be able to heat their whole community. So we've had a battle with that, but we've got to make sure we educate people, like just so you know what's in your neighborhood.
Right, and to that point, I don't want to minimize the impact of small-scale facilities either. This is not I don't want to say it's just industrial scale that is an issue. Small scale are also huge issues. The American Lung Association, the American Heart Association have said that we should not be supporting wood pellet biomass either as bioenergy or in this industrial scale form because of the incredible health impacts that it has. So whatever the scale is of the biomass industry, it comes with a lot of community harms. And unfortunately, as Tegan said, that doesn't get enough airtime. I don't know why it is, but we seem to be able to turn a blind eye to community impacts in this country, and I think that's a real shame.
Yeah.
So, on the community impacts, I'm assuming there's air quality impacts in Asia, right, at the final endpoint of all this. And so I'm wondering if you guys have done any sort of cross-national organizing on this. I mean, with Canada, but also with Japan or.
Do you want to speak to that?
Well, yeah, just really briefly for Biofuel Watch, a really key engagement has been through the Environmental Paper Network. I encourage everyone to, check it out. It's a great resource. I think all of our organizations are participating in the and they have an East Asia Biomass Working Group. So that's how we've been able to keep track really and connect with groups that are there. And then I guess this is where this is important to uplift some of the successes that NGOs have had in South Korea in particular, without being able to recite the details. They have recently had some success in putting the brakes on the subsidies for biomass in South Korea. So I think you're bringing up something that we can continue to work on, but that does exist. And so Environmental Paper Network is in here. It's really grassroots, but it's worth checking out. Great resource, Biomass Delusion as well. There's a Biomass Action Network now through EPI.
And we are at a law conference after all. I will say that the point of intervention for us as campaigners thinking about policy and campaigning is before the facilities are built. The point of intervention for the legal avenues usually come through those air quality violations. So the Southern Environmental Law Center in the southeastern United States has been amazing at being able to uplift community concerns and be able to ensure additional protections for them when those facilities do break the laws. And the same thing is true in the United Kingdom. I don't know about South Korea and Japan, but there have been effective lawsuits against Drax in Yorkshire for the pollution that they're still polluting on that little town, as well as the worker impacts. I know that there have been workers unions that have stood up to Drax's impacts on the other side of the Atlantic, as you point out.
Yeah. For Japan, too, I will say that there's a complicated. Japan is specifically trying to move away from nuclear for a reason that is obviously very important to people there. That doesn't mean that biomass needs to be the solution. Two groups that we work with in Japan, Mighty Earth Japan and then Friends of the Earth Japan, have been doing some good work, and they're also, looking. It's interesting because one of their other kind of big supply countries, I think, is Vietnam, and it can be harder to get, to talk to people in Vietnam about what's happening because the impacts for them are potentially more severe in speaking out against the industry than they are in a place like British Columbia or the United States. So that's a factor as well. The more we can highlight how bad the sector is, the easier their work is to push their government to redirect their subsidies to, actual clean renewables. And hopefully that has cascading effects. What we don't want to do is then put more pressure on Vietnam, which is why we work in this global coalition that I mentioned. So definitely would recommend looking at EPN's Biomass Action Network. And they have they put out a report in November showing what the forward-looking projections for the biomass sector are globally. So to get a sense of the scale of how severe it is, I highly recommend.
Maya?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. We've got human health is coming up again and again, and it seems to be a little hard, a little tricky to find some of the analyses like dioxins and furans that real hardcore carcinogens. We talk about NOx a lot, and I see a lot of NOx data, and then VOCs, which basically smashes all these incredibly toxic compounds that basically
feedback on PM. So how do we, how do we make it easier for us to just access this really, the profile of really dangerous individual compounds? That's number one. And then the second thing I wanted to say is, talking about EPN, they did feature Monster, which features basically all the panelists. And so it's a short film that sort of exposes this issue, and there are little notes at the end that will constantly be updated as NRDC and CBD provide more action items. It's going to be a constant update. So yeah, anyway, so that was the VOC and chemical issues.
Is the Monster documentary available to the public at this point?
Yeah, EPN, Environmental Paper Network that Gary mentioned, has featured it. They spotlighted it a few weeks ago.
So where would people go to find?
You just type Monster on the Horizon Environmental Paper Network, and it'll be there. Or
She uploaded it on Vimeo as well.
yeah, it's uploaded on Vimeo.
It's a really good little video. It's very useful. We could have shown it here. I'm really gratified for all the interest in the issue. Sorry, Alex.
I'm actually going to have to step away to make it across campus to another panel, so I'm going to hand it over to Tegan to continue facilitating Q&A.
So what are your, I guess, best practices for the, bad forest practices that have been happening, like in the United States, has been happening, that we've had Forest Service for over 100 years, and they've been dismanaging our forests, and so they're in a dire state. We have the beetle kill, we have, what, do you have any like suggestions, other suggestions of how to be dealing with that?
That's a complicated answer, because it's so site specific. And I think looking at all the threats to our forest now and trying to untangle natural process from process caused by stress of climate change, stress of industrial forestry that's been placed on forests, and then finding a pathway through each of those sort of causes. I think it's important. Ultimately, depending on what your goal is, whether it's protecting what ancient forest we have left or protecting communities, sort of takes different angles on it. If you really want to protect communities, you start from the communities work outward into the forest, and goals of addressing bad forestry practices and plantations that are maybe have never been had any sort of follow-up treatment may be appropriate to address plantations individually that burn spread fire into natural forests. So there isn't an easy answer, because it really have to be out where you're talking about specifically, and look at what options exist for that actual site.
I mean, your question goes to the heart of some of the things we've been discussing at this law conference for decades, right? So I think it's important. We as a group working on global state natural resources, we've tried to talk about different things. The one thing that I'd like to elevate right now that I don't think gets enough attention is the issue of land tenure. And I think the increasing concentration of the ownership of land in the hands of few is at the heart of the problem. So I think there's some things that we need to talk about before we get into practices. And I would say, from my experience, actually, we've gotten lost in the weed of practices, thinking that there's some sort of right way to manage the forest. And one of the reasons we've seen it is the absolute failure of certification to do anything to actually address the problem. And I can say that professionally. Decades ago, I put tons of energy in the Forest Stewardship Council, and I've been nothing but betrayed. So I've kind of stepped back a little bit from talking about, oh yeah, well, if we do the right variable retention, that's not, I think land tenure is key. So we need to break up companies like Sierra Pacific Industries, which has now moved in here to Oregon in a big way.
Right.
They're the biggest landowner in the country.
And increasing massive in Washington.
Yeah, so, I mean, I appreciate the question, but I think we need to think about these things in very serious questions about equity, about land tenure, and about, access to political decision making.
Capitalism.
Yeah, but ultimately.
And I've seen on the ground Sierra Pacific take fines for cutting down oversized trees that the forester told the loggers not to cut. And then they cut it and like, oh no, bad, bad, bad. It's like they don't care.
SBI is deep into this Golden State Natural Resources scheme. They're behind the scenes, they're not exposing their hand, but they're the ones who sold the properties. The one in Tuolumne County where one of the pellet mills would be sited and built, the other one in Lassen County. Both of these properties belong to Sierra Pacific Industries. They sold the land to them. And the one in Lassen County, Sierra Pacific Industries still held on to a little piece of land so they can have access to the rail line that goes through there, that goes down to Stockton. So, and then to make sure, so Stockton, where all the wood pellets would be concentrated from these plants to be exported. So SBI is a major villain. I guess I would hope people put SBI and Drax in the same category. Right?
And the sovereign wealth fund scheme.
I was just about to ask if anyone would agree that global capitalism is at the root of the crisis in this industry, as well as concentration of wealth, poverty, wars. So some ideas that are gaining currency in the community around here is that, hey, we have to do something systemic about global capitalism. And I was a CPA for 25 years. I came to a point where I had to reject capitalism, and now I'm basically a borderline Marxist, because we need to literally privatize, deprivatize a lot of our enterprises and hand them over to worker co-ops or anything systemic. Is anybody else thinking about that? What systemic strategy would be appropriate, and achievable?
I mean, yes. I'll say that on our side of the border, I think, and related to your question as well, the meaningful solutions that we see are around restoring land, to First Nations regaining control of their land, and so, which is inherently tied into that, right? It's just extremely challenging when there's, we have a few big companies that can have so much wealth and profit tied up in extraction and exploitation of land, and it's not benefited, settler communities either, workers, and now you have a lot of rural communities so dependent on these really extractive, exploitative sectors, and very little investment in alternatives. So yes, we still have a ghost town problem in BC. And that's inherently tied in. But I think the thing that I've seen in practice that has been hopeful and meaningful and real in my time has been land back to First Nations.
And on that note, like I said, First Nations are here, Indigenous people, we had to deal with over 100 years of mismanagement, right? And then, a fire starts, it's high intensity, right? It's scorched earth, it sterilizes the area, and we need mixed canopy forests, we can be healthy. I deal with plantations, and it's, that the Forest Service created, it's terribly frightening to go visit them, but, we need solutions, now, so.
Exactly.
That's good. And so we, those are the things that are being presented.
Yeah, well, we have similar problems in BC with plantations as well, especially ones that were planted in the 80s. And that's why we have a lot of the reason why we have these big fires is because they start or spread through clear cuts or plantations, and then we become so high intensity that they just burn down old forests that are more resilient as well. But the logging industry doesn't have much interest in logging those because they're not as profitable. So, we see things like things being promoted like thinning, which would be good in a plantation, but they're applying those to older forests because that's where there's more money for them to go on. So it's also just it's just a lack of good thing. So yeah, we need like a combination of things with different improvements. Totally agree. Sorry, you have to go ahead. I think people are just gonna filter out of, there isn't another session in here?
If anybody wants a copy of Hoodwink, I'm happy to give away. Come on up, come on up.